Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Sasha Chan, and I'm part of the marketing team here at CityBase. CityBase is a government technology company that transforms the way cities connect and do business with constituents. CityBase works with local governments, agencies, and utilities to integrate payment functionality, business processes, and communications into a central cloud-based platform that consumers can access through the web, mobile, kiosk, or point of sale. Today, we are presenting Retiring Your Legacy Software in 2019, presented by Alex Pedenko, Chief Technology Officer at CityBase, and Matt Novak, VP of Business Development at CityBase. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box by clicking on the Ask a Question button on the left-hand corner of your screen. We will have a dedicated Q&A section at the end of the presentation. Now, without further ado, we will turn time over to Matt Novak, VP of Business Development at CityBase.
Thank you, Sasha, and welcome everybody. There's a lot of reasons why government and utilities stay with older technology. It's very comfortable. It's easy. I hear it all the time. If it's not broke, don't fix it. We're seeing a trend of innovators moving to newer cloud-based solutions that better meets the needs of both their customers and their internal staff users. These newer solutions set you up to be better for the future, and they also present cost-saving opportunities at the same time. And for those of you weighing the pros and cons of investing in new technology, here are a few reasons why you should make it a priority to move away from your legacy software. Your workforce is retiring at a higher rate today than in previous generations, a trend known as the silver tsunami. You've probably heard of this, especially in government and utilities, which is one of the last surviving place of a good pension, where most of your employees are eligible to retire by age 55. According to the 2018 labor force statistics from the current population survey, the median age of employees in government utilities hovers around 50 years old, which is higher than most other industries. This makes a great time also to consider retiring your legacy technology. As your staff retires, their institutional knowledge of how to use and troubleshoot the older and less intuitive systems is also leaving your organization. Their experience, these are probably the folks that you rely on for QA and for testing every time that you have an upgrade. And for the troubleshooting liaison to the support desk with your vendor. As these staff retire, it's very difficult to attract newer staff, younger staff, away from the public sector to the government and utility jobs. And a big part of that is that this generation demands better software and a better user experience. You know, newer technology can make your IT budget a lot more predictable and cost effective. What we've seen with legacy technology over the years, the traditional, you purchase software, you pay an upfront license fee, you pay a significant annual maintenance fee, which is typically 20 to 25% of that original license. And you are charged a significant amount of services every time that you have an upgrade or that you require customization. So certainly going to a cloud-based solution, a SaaS product, software as a service, you typically pay for those things on either a flat monthly fee or a flat annual fee, or perhaps on a per transaction basis, but it's very predictable and easy to budget for. Certainly with newer technology, it is much easier to integrate back-end systems. So this can also significantly reduce your costs as well as provide you with real-time interoperability between your different systems. We see it all the time in our sector where we find a system, some source system in some government agency that is not capable of providing APIs or web services, and so we're forced to do some kind of a direct database integration or a flat file integration because that's the only thing possible, and that really typically doesn't allow for real time. But any new solution, any cloud-based solution that you work with today should be web services enabled, should come with documented APIs, should be more available for open data integration with other sources. I think another point for new technology is that prior with legacy solutions, an upgrade might take days or weeks or months, or even in the case of some enterprise systems, an upgrade might take a year or more, which is a significant amount of staff time. It's also a big blow with a lot of testing, a lot of changes in a new version of software. And that's not the case with cloud technology. At CityBase, with our system, with other software as a service solutions such as ours, the updates are pushed out to you in an ongoing basis so that you're always getting patches, especially that's important with security, malware, things like that. But you're not only getting patches and fixes, you're also getting new features rolled out to you on an ongoing basis. And I think also a very important factor is certainly with your legacy solutions, you probably have servers on-site, on-premise. And those servers have to be replaced every, say, 3 or 4 years. So there's a hardware cost there. Those servers require, electricity, someone to apply patches and manage them. So there's a labor component. And certainly, if you need to add memory or RAM or anything like that, there's a physical cost associated with that. You don't have that in the cloud. We're able to allocate more space, more storage, on demand in the cloud, and the sky's the limit. So again, back to attracting that younger workforce. I think it's very important, your younger workforce is coming in, they're used to working on their phones, on their tablets. They expect to have a user interface that is similar to Facebook or LinkedIn or Pinterest. And when you bring a younger employee and sit them down in front of a green and black screen attached to a mainframe that is completely unintuitive, and you have to use, command keys on the keyboard, and you can't point and click, that's just something that doesn't work for them. So you want to attract the younger workforce, you need to have a modern user experience. Poor user experience is not just about attracting new employees. This is a great article we referenced here from Bloomberg, 2019, so it's current, and it talks about America's cities running on software from the 80s, literally. This is a good read. I suggest taking 5 minutes to read it, but this talks about, I believe it's San Francisco, and their property tax department, and how they cannot enter all the information for a property tax transaction on one screen. Even the address information is broken into separate fields, separate screens, and this leads to a lot of error in data entry. Now that's a throwback back to the 80s when memory was expensive, when they had to worry about the number of bits and bytes. Not the case now with modern user experience, modern conditional logic, scrolling of forms, things like that. So I highly suggest reading this article. I think another important fact, remote work is on the rise. It just is. And I don't care if you're in private sector or in government. Everybody works from home. And that might be only to the extent that we all have smartphones and we're all responding to emails during the evenings and on weekends. But beyond that, if you're on your smartphone or your tablet at home on a Saturday evening and there's an important work situation and you're able to address it, to be able to access your source system from your phone, and it doesn't require a separate trip into the office, so much more convenient. And certainly in the private sector, my job, a lot of work is done these days from airports and airplanes and hotel rooms and just on the go. So very important that your solution is accessible via browser and is mobile responsive so that it works the same on your PC as it does on your smartphone, and will create a lot more flexibility for your employees. And I'll transition over to our Chief Technology Officer, Alex Pedenko, to get into more of the technical risk of using older software, as well as some approaches to upgrading to newer tech.
Thank you, Matt. And now, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Alex Pedenko, our Chief Technology Officer.
Thanks, Sasha. I think I want to look at this golfing computer for a few more seconds. But Matt, thank you. Matt did a great job of talking through the business side reasons for doing some of these technology upgrades. But I want to also speak about some of the technology and information security reasons that you would want to do this. So the first one is information security. The way software was secured, and I use the term secured very loosely in the old days, was to assume that your network perimeter, your networking infrastructure was sufficient. It was basically this idea that if you have a firewall, then you're safe. And the reality is that wasn't the case then, and that most certainly is not the case now. Most of the security breaches that happen these days are not even an attempt to get through a firewall. They are typically some sort of a phishing attack or social engineering, things of that nature that let you take over somebody's valid credentials, valid account, and then escalate permissions from there. So really, the question that you want to be able to ask yourself isn't do I have a good firewall? Is my software secure? The question that you want to be able to ask yourself and get an answer to is, have I been breached? And if so, how long ago? So modern systems still focus on perimeter security. That doesn't go away, but they also focus on analytics, being able to give you information about what's happening to your environment right now. The reality is that people are going to click on links no matter how much you secure your systems. And so what you want is you want to handle both the human side of it through education, but also the technology side of it through awareness, through monitoring, through dashboards that tell you when an event happens, so that if there is a breach, if somebody gets phished and clicks a link, that their computer is quarantined in 50 milliseconds and disconnected from the network, so that the damage is minimized, so that you're aware and can do something about it. The reality is that the fact that somebody got into a system isn't the end of the world. What is when somebody gets into a system undetected and you find out about it days later. And so if you look at some of the publications in the space on this, it takes an average sophisticated attacker something like half an hour to escalate permissions from their entry point to something more critical. And so long as you act quickly, you're able to contain the damage and move on. Now, why am I talking about this in the scope of upgrading applications? Well, the way you have the monitoring that's necessary to support this is by both instrumenting the underlying physical infrastructure and instrumenting the applications themselves. And the way modern security systems operate is by listening to an event stream of all the minuscule little things that a piece of software does in its course of business, and then by pulling correlations that don't make sense. So for example, you logging into your email on its own isn't suspicious. You logging into your email, setting up a forwarding rule that sends everything to a different domain and changing your password is a bit more suspicious. And so systems that are able to integrate tightly with the systems that you operate are able to make those better inferences and be faster with a lower signal-to-noise ratio. And so when you install more modern systems, you avail yourself of the opportunity to act on that information and to also bring in some of these newer, more sophisticated security systems. The other thing that you get is, the slide says continuous innovation, but you enable that through continuous delivery and continuous deployment. So Matt touched on the shift to SaaS, and we're all familiar with it, but in addition to the fact that you get global updates and you're always on the latest version of software, you get this really big advantage of continuous delivery. What is continuous delivery? And shameless plug for our blog, if you want more information on continuous delivery, it is on our blog. But in a nutshell, the basic idea is that rather than having quarterly releases to your software or even semi-annual releases to your software, you release software in very, very small increments with very high frequency. The basic idea of this is that small changes are easier to test, less likely to cause catastrophic outage, and easier to deploy in part. So when you have a large data center that's running multiple nodes, multiple physical nodes with your software on it, you can do things like you can do things like a canary release, which is this idea of, I'm jumping ahead, I'm sorry, but this idea of we deploy a piece of software to one of 100 nodes, and we make sure that that software can coexist. And then we are able to see how that new software, how that new patch or whatever it is performs in the environment before we roll it out everywhere. And so the idea is that you make very small incremental changes that together amount to the same as your larger releases would. But you're able to test them in isolation. You're able to test them in a production environment without subjecting yourself to the risk and to the vagaries of large releases. The other thing that it lets you do is as you move to SaaS, as you move to new solutions, you don't necessarily have to do a one and done massive cutover, right? If I think about the people that we've worked with and the agencies and departments that we've worked with and have done large installations for, one of the biggest concerns generally is migration and cutover. Nobody wants the headache. It's always traumatic both to the IT staff and to the end users. And so a way that we've found a great success with is this notion of a pilot release. And so you take your existing system, and this really applies to most systems, to customer information systems, or source systems as it were, to payment systems, to pretty much most systems that have a customer interface or an internal interface. You take whatever your new piece of technology is, and you set it up on a parallel domain. So, for example, if your domain is mynewco.com, you can set up pilot.mynewco.com, and you stand up your new functionality there, and you give people the opportunity to opt in to the new functionality, and keep your existing systems in parallel and running. Now, that does increase the amount of work that you have to do up front, because you do have to make sure that the new software can coexist with the old software. But the advantages of that are the fact that you can fail over or fail back if you need to, and that you don't have to do this massive cutover. And so the idea is you have a pilot site in parallel with your main site for any of your systems, and you release that new functionality to that pilot site in those small increments, so that over time you gain confidence in that pilot site, and you gain usage of that pilot site as people opt into the new one. And so at some point you reach critical mass, and once you've reached critical mass, once there's enough confidence and functionality on the new site, then you say, okay, we can now finish the cutover and retire the old site. And by doing it that way, there's not a massive event. There's not the risk associated with a major cutover, and you end up having much smoother releases and happier customers. The last thing that newer technology gives you, Matt touched on this as well, is this notion of APIs. One of the most interesting things that we see is this prevalence of custom software in this space. And when I say custom software, I mean software that's built in-house by consulting firms, by staff engineers that solve a very specific problem. Now, it's kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the problems that this custom software tries to solve are very important and are generally niche, and very particular to your specific experience and your specific use case. On the other hand, the more of this custom software that's deployed locally, the harder it is to maintain, the more expensive it is to maintain, the less compatible with the outside world it is. And so what we've seen success with, and what we've seen people have success with in the field is to focus more on secured exposure of their functionality through API rather than complete systems. So if you think about it in terms of rather than building out a whole payment website, you create an API for your payment system so that third-party payment websites could consume it. Now, I don't mean a completely open API. There are still ways to secure it from a networking standpoint, and there are ways to secure it from an explicit access standpoint. So these would not be arbitrary third parties. These would rather be people that you still know and work with. But the idea is that you expose an API, which is a programmatic way for somebody else to interact with you, and then you shift the responsibility of user experience and interaction onto a third-party firm that does that for a living. What that gives you is the flexibility to then in the future say, hey, third-party firm, we want to work with somebody else without any impact to your internal systems, because basically whoever else comes in plugs into your existing API and nothing changes on your side. And it also gives you the ability to avail yourself of new technology in the future that you had not thought of previously, or that even the market had not thought of previously. Because all of these new systems are more likely to be able to consume an API and pull the information from your system that you want it to without having to contemplate all the screens, all the use cases, all the business rules that are associated with that functionality. So, Matt has talked about some of the business use cases for this, which I think are incredibly compelling. And there are a number of technology and security use cases, which I also think are compelling. So I think that together provides a compelling use case, and hopefully an opportunity for me to say the word compelling one more time, to consider new technology and consider migrating to some newer systems.
Great, thank you, Alex. We're now at the Q&A section of our presentation. So just as a reminder, if you have not already done so, please type your questions into the box by clicking on the Ask a Question button on the left-hand corner of your screen, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible, but if we don't, we'll be sure to address them after the webinar. Matt, the first question is actually for you, so I'll start with you. You mentioned SaaS technology is easier to budget for. What are some of the first steps you'd recommend for an agency looking to budget for a tech upgrade?
I guess that would depend on the type of software. Certainly for payment software, you'll see a lot of transaction-based pricing. And I know at CityBase we do some of that ourselves. For software like utility billing or ERP or other applications like that, you might see more of a subscription-based, a monthly fee or an annual fee. Certainly there's a lot of good research out there. You probably can come across some recent RFP responses online just by Googling. Find other peers, other utilities, other government agencies that have recently purchased similar software to what you're looking to buy.
Great. Alex, this one seems appropriate for you. For the systems that are to be retired, what data actually needs to be preserved?
That's an interesting question. The answer is twofold. There are regulatory requirements that dictate the kinds of data, or that dictate retention policies for certain types of data. And so for that, I would, one, say I'm not a lawyer, and two, encourage you to speak with the relevant regulatory or compliance person for your systems. From a technology standpoint, provided that you meet whatever retention policies you have, the answer then becomes a function of data migration. If data as part of a migration onto a new system can be imported into the new system, then generally storage is cheap, more is more. If it cannot, if the only way to access this historical data is to keep the old system around, then it should be part of your transition plan, or rather migration plan. So the idea then becomes you want to weigh the amount of history that you want to be able to expose to whatever system, to whatever use case is on that system, against the cost of continuing to maintain that old system. Bake that into your project plan and then sunset the data along with the system. Now, I never advocate data destruction, with the exception of regulatory requirements. And so even sunsetting, I would imagine, would look like some sort of long-term storage, be it physical media, Amazon's Glacier service. There's a number of different ways to inexpensively store that information.
That actually is a great segue into the next question. For what period of time should the archive data be retained?
Yeah, that again is primarily driven by regulatory requirements. So I don't want to misspeak, but generally 7 years is a fair mark. Again, the specific numbers vary by type of data, be it healthcare data, payment data, personally identifiable information. All of those have different regulatory requirements that dictate how long those things should be retained for.
Okay, I think this one's still more applicable to you, Alex, but Matt, feel free to jump in. For those of us still using older software, what are some steps we can take to improve our security?
So I'll take a first stab at this. Like I said, security today is much more about awareness than it is about actual system security. Now, that's not to say that system security is unimportant. It is, but most attacks today don't happen because somebody hacked their way into a Cisco router. So on the system side, it's actually fairly straightforward. Keep up to date on all your patches on all your endpoints, an endpoint being a person's terminal, their laptop or their PC, and any servers that you have. So basic IT hygiene. And then the biggest component is actually training. It's making sure that people know what a phishing email looks like. It's making sure that there is a set policy in place for what do I do when I receive an email that I think is suspicious. So, at CityBase we have a very strict focus on security because one of the things that we do is payment processing. And so we have regulatory requirements through PCI compliance, through our level 1 PCI compliance. But we want to be better than that because that gives us more confidence in our own security. And so we have things like if an email comes in that is appearing to be a phishing email, it gets sent to our information security department. Our information security department will send out an update or an alert company-wide saying, if you see an email like this, do not click it, send it here, and so on. I think it's very important to not underestimate the value of the human element and the fact that most attacks today are less about literal hacking and more about tricking people into clicking a link or doing something else like that.
Great. Well, that's all the questions we see for now, but please feel free to add and we'll make sure to follow up with you after the webinar. And with that, I want to thank Matt and Alex for joining us. Like Alex mentioned earlier, we do have more information about this on our blog that our Matt Novak also authored as well. So we're very passionate about this topic, as you can tell. But we do appreciate you spending your time with us. We hope you're walking away with a better understanding of the benefits of migrating to newer cloud-based technology. We will also be sending out on-demand recording of this after this presentation. So please feel free to share with your colleagues and join us next month on April 24th for our Q1 product update.